homeschoolers. Today we are starting a project with Classical Conversations, Cycle 1, Week 18. So the artist we're studying was kind of a complicated one for me because he traveled so much and he was so diverse. His name was Greco. As you will learn, that's not his real name, but that was his famous name. Greco means the Greek in Spanish or in Latin. Now, Greco's Greek name, birth name, is Dominikos Theotokopoulos, and that is the name he carried with him throughout his artistic career. He was a painter, a sculptor, and architect of the Spanish Renaissance. He was born October 1st in 1541 in Heraklion, Greece. He died on April 7th, 1614, in Toledo, Spain. Now, the Spaniards always called him the Greek or El Greco. He painted in the period of the Renaissance, which was called Mannerism period. A mannerism is, if you think about someone you know and love, or just when you're observing people, they have like gestures. I like to use my hands, or they have something quirky in their voice, like they'll have a little lisp, or someone will have a beautiful voice that is like flowing and you love to hear their voice. Or also a gesture could be a behavior where I know I do this. When I talk, I rub my knee because it's a nervous quirk. So this is what El Greco loved. He got a little bit tired of the old Renaissance where everything had to be perfect and regal and kind of cold and stoic. He wanted to put in a little more of not how people really look, but how he saw them. So that was interesting. He studied mannerisms. He also studied behavior quite a bit. He painted stuffiness and tallness and shortness. And you'll notice that some of his paintings would make someone long. I know when I was young, we used to get the Funnies, which was a newspaper every Sunday, and it would tell little stories about our favorite characters. You would probably relate it to Snoopy of nowadays. But we would get this putty, and it looked like gum, but it wasn't as sticky as gum. And we'd put it over our favorite funny. You'd just lay it on top of it and rub it, and then it would take the picture. It would make like a Xerox copy on the putty of our picture. And what we would do sometimes, you can make someone fat by stretching them that way, and if you wanted them to be tall and skinny, you'd stretch the putty that way, and it would distort the figure. Now, El Greco loved to do that in his paintings. Let's say he did a queen, and the queen was like this. So he would paint her real stiff. Or he did a queen who he liked, and she was laughing. He'd paint her jolly and jovial. This is what El Greco did, and he was quite famous for mannerism-type paintings. But also I noticed he did some stoic, beautiful religious paintings when he was hired to do so. He pretty much would be like a chameleon that turns colors. Whatever the need was, he could produce. So when I was studying about him, it was almost like studying about 3 or 4 different men. He was that great in his changeability, diversity of paint. Okay, so the mannerism in Spanish, they called it. They called him the king of the maniera, which means mannerism. The difference. He studied. He lived in Crete, Greece, and he wanted to be famous. He always wanted to be famous, but he learned soon in his early 20s that Greece just wasn't doing it for him. Maybe he was too much above his time, or maybe he was just stagnant there or not happy there. It doesn't really say. So he always wanted to move to Italy because that was the happening place where many artists were becoming famous, and there was a big need, a big market for religious art. So in his late 20s, he moved to Italy. He was there around 10 years. He did some painting, beautiful, fabulous paintings, but I guess he had a temper. He would argue with the priests or the bishops or whoever would hire him to do their cathedrals or their churches or their monasteries. He would say, well, I don't really see it that way, or I want to change the paint. Or just, he saw things the way they should be in his mind, and the people who hired him, who commissioned him, didn't always adhere to his form of kind of modern mannerisms. So after not doing extremely well the way he had hoped to do in Italy, he decided to go to Spain. Although he never spoke Spanish, he loved Spain. He loved everything about it. He loved their culture, he loved their food, he loved their art. He even called himself a Catholic when he lived in Spain, and it doesn't say when he was baptized or what church he was, but he called himself that. The one thing he did do, he stayed with writing, signing on his artwork. He would always do it in Greek characters. He would not sign according to whatever country he was in. He kept his name the same, and he was very proud to do that for his father. So I'm really condensing the information about this very prolific artist. So you can always Google him. You can look at his life. There's also a new book that was made in the late 90s about him. So you might look into that. But I'm briefly giving you a synopsis. He called himself a Spaniard. He married in his 20s in Greece. But after leaving Italy and then going to Spain, he had another so-called wife. He fell in love in Spain, and he didn't want the church to declare him a bigamist for several reasons. I don't know if he was all that moral, but he wanted work, and if you were a bigamist, like with 2 wives, you could not get much work in a Catholic country. So he had a son by this love of his life. Her name was Jeronima, and their son was named Jorge Theotokopoulos. He kept his father's Theotokopoulos for his son's name. He was feeling more important when he was in Spain. The king hired him for paintings to hang in monasteries, and El Greco complained there too. He complained about the cheap fees and the cheap temper paints, and I need better paints. A lot of times if you meet an artist, or you know of an artist, or you study about an artist, they are quite, they have a kind of explosive temperaments, because they sometimes see things. I know I'm a small little artist, but when I see something, immediately my brain has it all finished. And so if somebody tries to change the color or what I want to do, it isn't that you're angry, it's that you get kicked off the boat, so to speak, where you're on a track and you can't stop till the track is finished. And when you're told, by hierarchy and money and donors and people who sponsor you, no, do it this way, then it kind of loses your name and it loses your touch, and like maybe they could hire anybody to do it, So I sort of understand El Greco's temperament. So his son, by the way, as he grew up, he also worked with his father, although his son was better with architecture as opposed to art and painting. So let's see. So he was kind of blackballed, so to speak, when he was in Italy, and also when he argued with the church in Spain, a little bit blackballed, which means you get a reputation of not being easy to get along with. But it didn't bother El Greco, because there was so much royalty and so much wealth in Spain that people just hired him for their own palaces to come and do their family portraits. And sometimes he was known, he did dogs or pigs or animals and dressed them up royally. He just probably did this for himself to joke. But he would have beautiful stuffy dogs painted in royal clothing. And those paintings are still very famous, even though he never showed it to him or sold it to him. They did not have cameras then. So you would hire, if you were wealthy, you'd hire a very famous or wonderful artist to paint pictures of your children and your palace and all your land that you owned. A kind of a braggadocious type spirit, bragging of what they owned. So he had plenty of work. El Greco knew how to hang around with the elite, wealthy people, the rich people. And he wanted more than anything to be famous for his art and to kind of merge into being royalty, Greek royalty, even though he wasn't born into Greek royalty. He thought, well, in a different country I can fake that I'm royal because I'm so good at what I do. So he is very secure in his work. He made much, I don't know how they call the money, it's different from Greece to Spain, but he made so much money he was almost equal to some of the noblemen, some of the people that were wealthy and royalty. But he rented a room in a palace there, and he just threw money around. He had lace outfits made, and he had the food that the royalty ate, and he went to the parties, and he had the horses that they had, and he really thought he was something. And he went through all his money faster than he could earn it, and he died poor. And I'll get into that toward the end of my story here. he established workshops, very elegant workshops, which means he made little places, almost like franchises, which was, it's very common now where you'll see a Costco in different cities and different countries, different states. But then it wasn't. So he was very smart. He made workshops all over the place in Spain, 40 miles apart. Some were 60 miles apart. And I think he even went to other European countries. And in these workshops, he would hire the best that he could find, sometimes train the best artists. And they not only did art and frescoes, but they did architect carving. They did altarpieces, which were, still the Gothic shapes of wood. He did metalwork. He was so diversified, which means he had himself in many different forms of art, which I thought was very intelligent. Good choice. So he had these people in all his little workshops all over the place. And in one of the workshops, he could do his crazy art. His long, tall figures, or his queen and kings looking like dogs, or he would do eerie angels, like when he would do a religious portrait, maybe for a church. It was just beautiful. And maybe he'd go home and make the angels all ugly and dark. He'd make the devil red. And he liked to joke. He kind of had a sense of humor in his mannerism art. Al Greco developed and designed in Toledo for a famous cupola there. It was a cathedral. It's still there, and you can still see some of his art. In the late 90s, he was rediscovered because when he died, he kind of got a bad reputation as a crazy artist. And it's really sad because this man was writing a book about him in our time when I was young, in the 1990s. And as they were writing the book about him, they went all through, where he worked and where he had his workshops. And this nun from a convent said, "I'll tour you through the graveyard and I'll show you his grave." So the person who was writing the book was real excited to go see where El Greco was buried. And she said, "There it is, and there it is, all full of dust and spiders. There's nothing much there." And I found that very sad, kind of like he's there in everything. He's there in the cathedrals. He's there in the private palaces. He's there with other artists. Cezanne, Picasso, and Pollock all followed his form of art. They were inspired by him. He himself, El Greco, loved Michelangelo, but by the time he got there to Italy, Michelangelo was dead. So to say he's nothing but dust and spiders was not very nice of that nun, because he lived a very exciting life. And his legacy is alive in his art, which will never die, which I think is wonderful. I say praises and kudos and thank you to museums and artisans who saved these beautiful works, and to the royalty who still have it in some of their palaces. So now this wonderful man who went through Europe trying to find stories about El Greco, he did it like a symposium lecture speech in the Museum of Art in Washington, D.C., and thousands and thousands of people showed up, and this made a rebirth of El Greco's art. So now it's booming again, and people are in art school are trying to learn his form of art, and people are talking about him, and they're learning about him and about all his visits in Europe. And so I think we should respect El Greco. I think it's wonderful when an artist, they didn't have Xerox machines, and so lots of artists just copied the other artists with the Byzantine art, which we appreciate. But we always need that little weirdo, that little pilgrim of new art to come and explode upon the art scene to teach us that we can be different and we can be better. So it was fun, it was exciting, and very informative to learn about El Greco. So I always do a project for the children in my little art class, and I'm thinking, how can I explain El Greco to them? He was a kind of obsessive, crazy man, how do I explain his greatness? So what I decided to do was, it was very easy, and you can do this at home if you'd like to. It's very easy, very simple. I just drew, I guess you would call it like a paper doll. So I decided to introduce El Greco to my art class. What I did was, I drew 5 little figures of boys, because I have boys and girls in class. And I just put emotions or mannerisms, happy, angry, laughing, joy, and sad. And I did some for the boys, and then some for the girls. And I asked the children just simply to color in how they felt when they experienced these emotions. So we have happy, angry. I just love how the kids did it. One little girl just scratched her angry all over the place. Sad is blue. And then I have a little girl happy and laughing, and another one who's joyful. So the children, we discussed how colors can evoke emotions. We just had a great time discussing it. So then, after they colored in their little paper dolls, we just cut them out. It was just kind of a craft project. So I'll show you. I just cut one out like this. And we had to cut them quite small so they would fit on one sheet of paper. And then here I have what is a corner beveler, which kind of makes the sharp edges look nice. So you just put it in there and make kind of an oval corner like that. And that's how we did each one. Okay, so then you can see a completed one that I did as a sample. And this is a happy little boy, a joyful little boy, a laughing little boy, and the mannerisms change. The mouth changes, the smile changes. This is an angry little boy, the smile goes down, the color turns wild. And this is a sad little boy in black. So now, when I was a little girl, I said this prayer, and it was, God speaks to me in my mind. He speaks and says, be good, be kind. And there's a picture of Jesus saying this. So imagine he is whispering this prayer. It says he speaks to me. And then, get this, I thought this was so interesting. El Greco, there's a picture of him right there. Here's a better one. There's a picture of El Greco. Now notice he looks like a clown with all the silk and lace and fur, but that's how a nobleman dressed, and he loved looking noble. So anyway, I put a picture of El Greco there, and it says, you know, when he was born, when he died, his mannerism, his movement that he copied, but this is what he was famous for saying, and I found this very profound. I paint because the spirits whisper madly inside my head. And then the child's prayer says, God speaks in my mind to be good and kind. So here we have laid out our mannerism, emotional little pictures that the children colored in. And then we put the picture of when El Greco said, I paint because the spirits whisper madly inside my head. He said, in other words, they gave him incentive and they told him, you gotta paint. Well, Jesus said, I speak to you and tell you to be good and be kind. So it could have been the voice of Jesus, even though, you know, Jesus is God. So God of the Old Testament could have been telling El Greco, paint this, paint that, or given him inspiration to be a different type of artist. So the children learned that they too can listen to God's voice as he listened to God's voice, and created something that is of great historical value. So then we just got my laminator, heated it up. A laminator just puts plastic over your work so it will last. And we laminated our little project on El Greco. I would like to leave you with the names of some of El Greco's famous paintings, because you can look them up and it's worth the while. The Dormition of the Virgin in 1657, The Last Supper 1568, Christ Healing the Blind in 1570, The Holy Trinity 1755, The Assumption of the Virgin. Many artists portrayed that painting, and he did it in 1577. Saint Sebastian 1578, A Lady in a Fur Wrap 1580, A Female Portrait 1581, The Disrobing of Christ 1579, Cleansing of the Temple, 1584, The Resurrection, 1584, The Entombment of Christ, 1586, The Burial of the Count of Orgaz, 1586, Christ Carrying the Cross, which you should look at, from 1594 to 1604, St. Martin and the Beggar, 1597, View from Toledo, that's his famous one. It's his view from Toledo in his famous beloved Toledo. 1614, St. Peter and St. Paul, 1605, the Laocoon, 1606, the Adoration of the Shepherds, 1612, and the opening of the fifth seal, which he copied the idea from Revelations, and he painted that from 1608 to 1614. Please try to look up at least one of them. You will really be blessed and inspired. So that's it for the artist El Greco the Greek. I hope you learned some information about El Greco the Greek. And if you like this, please give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you hopefully next week. Have a great week, and remember, paint the way the Spirit whispers in your heart.